So I would like to introduce John Hendrix, and his solo show, Drawing Is Magic, is over in the Cragen Art Gallery currently, which you'll have an opportunity to view after the talk. We have a reception in the gallery from 6 to 7 p.m. There's food, so if you'd like to have a little snack, and you'll get to meet the artist, because John is here in person today. John is the Kenneth E. Hudson Professor of Art and Chair of the MFA in Illustration and Visual Culture program at the Sam Fox School of Design and Visual Arts at Washington University in St. Louis. He is a New York Times bestselling author and illustrator. His books include The Faithful Spy, Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the Plot to Kill Hitler, called a Best Book of 2018 by NPR, Drawing Is Magic, Discovering Yourself in a Sketchbook, The Holy Ghost, a Spiritual Comic, his award-winning, to name a few. So I'm not going to list all of them because he's very well accomplished, and we're very, excited and proud to have him here. His award-winning illustrations have also appeared on book jackets, newspapers, and magazines all over the world. His most recent graphic novel, The Mythmakers, the Remarkable Fellowship of J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, was named a Best Children's Book of 2024 by the New York Times. So I would like to welcome John to the stage to give us a talk of his work, and thank you.
Thank you. Hello, testing. Hi, good to be here. Thank you. That biography sounds really impressive, but if you Google me, this is what you get. Actually, I think this has now been corrected, but I'm a native Texan. I died in Sweetwater in 1952. And most importantly, one of my books is If I Can Do It Horseback, a cow country sketchbook. So honestly, that career seems pretty awesome. So today I'm going to talk about my work. But I think there's nothing worse than an artist talk that only focuses on that person. And so I really want to talk to artists, to young artists today, and especially kids who are interested in being artists or authors. And hopefully this can encourage you a little bit today. But I'm going to use my work to talk about some bigger ideas. And so I could have said that when I was 6 years old. I can still say it today. I love to draw. This is me in the middle of drawing a page, inking a page for The Mythmakers, my most recent book. This is not sped up. This is how I get so much done. That's a laugh line, sorry. So you have to spend so much time with your work. The reason I speed this up is because if you watched it real time, it would be hours and hours, right? And I think that's one of the things that often goes unnoticed when you think about making art. It's just you have to spend a lot of time alone, staring at the drawing as it emerges out of nothing. And oftentimes that can be really scary, and it can convince artists that maybe they shouldn't keep drawing just because that fear of the blank page and what's going to emerge is so scary. But I want to challenge some of your ideas a little bit about maybe what art making is. And I think drawing simply is visualized thinking, believe it or not. It's not an artifact you make on the page, but it's simply the act of thinking in images. And I think that's actually a helpful way to think about art. C.S. Lewis, again, if you leave me alone for 5 minutes, I will start talking about C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, so I'm sorry. This lecture will only be 4 hours. But Lewis himself said he did not dream in words, he dreamt in images. He saw a fawn carrying a package under his arm in the snow, in the woods, under a lamppost, and he was like, what does this story mean? What is this? I need to write to figure out what that image is in his head. And I am much the same way. I see images. This is me actually drawing at C.S. Lewis's house in Oxford. And I draw in my sketchbook all the time. And I love sketchbooks, whether they have cows in them or not. I love the mobile act of drawing because, and this is what I'm getting at, drawing is as much a process as it is a result. So again, it's easy to think that drawing is like making a beautiful picture. What if I told you that the drawing was actually the 99.9% of your time you're going to spend doing it, as opposed to what you get at the end? The artifact is kind of the leftovers from the process. And actually, I think kids have a lot to teach us in this area. If you're in college, what you're obsessed about is making a portfolio. When you're a kid, you're excited about drawing. You almost don't even care what the result is. So in this wonderful book, which I recommend all the time, The Supper of the Lamb, it's essentially a cookbook, but it's not a cookbook. It's a cookbook about art. The premise of the book is he's making Easter supper for 8. But really, over the course of the book, you realize it's really about making and about process. And he says this: interest in results will never conquer boredom with process. Right? Have you ever experienced that where you're like, man, I really want the results of this, but like I sort of don't want to do all the work of getting to the end? Well, you will want to make more work if you can like the process part and not just the results. In fact, in this book, he spends an entire chapter talking about cutting an onion. He says that the right way to cut an onion should take you an hour. Okay, that's insane. But the idea is that you should savor and enjoy the way that we make things, not just be rushing to the end. So for me, the way I enjoy that process is my sketchbook. Like I said, I carry a sketchbook all the time. I think I probably have ADD. I don't know. I think I just tend to listen better when my hand is moving. And so I draw all the time. Frankly, now I draw in church the most often because it's where every week I'm sitting there for an hour or two. And you get tired of drawing people's heads after a while. This is me. That's my horrified wife that somebody's taking a picture of us in church. This was actually for our St. Louis newspaper did a story on me. Truly, you cannot imagine the horror. I said to them, this is a church service. You cannot disrupt the church service. They're like, no, the photographer is very discreet. It was like Fashion Week. He set up this rig, and every 5 minutes it was like, this is why my wife is hiding herself from this photo. Okay, so I draw all the time in church, and what I'm doing is not necessarily making a sketch. I'm just drawing in pen, and I'm doing improvisation. Basically, if you've ever taken an improv class, I just say yes and. Whatever the hymn is, whatever the subject matter is, I just start drawing. Now, I know what you're thinking. These look all pretty good. These don't really feel like a sketchbook. And I'm not really cheating. It's just that I've drawn thousands and thousands of these, and I'm showing you my favorite 10. Okay, so this is cheating in the sense that I'm picking some of my favorites. But what I love about this process is that it is improvisational and it is process-based. Whether it works or not, it actually doesn't matter to me. If I get a good artifact at the end of it, well, then I'll show it to you. But the thing I really love is just sitting and making and listening and responding. And actually in church for me, it's a form of worship, actually. So this is one of the things I want to tell young people, that the word talent, I actually don't like the word talent. And a better way to think about your gifts is just simply time. You have to invest so much time in your craft to get better. And the only way you're going to make it through all those hundreds of hours is to enjoy what you are doing. Okay, here's me as a child. Look at this. I have a first place ribbon on this terrible drawing. Can you believe it? I was obsessed with Garfield as a child. Does anyone still know Garfield? The children, do you know Garfield? Okay, you guys are going to be all right. In high school, I forced my friends to buy these comics that I made. I printed them at Kinko's. Any Gen Xers remember Kinko's? And what's hilarious is the stuff that I made then actually looks closer to my work now than the stuff I was doing in college, which I got obsessed with Chris Van Allsburg, who wrote the Polar Express, and I wanted to make meaty, real, crafted narrative. I don't know. I wanted them to be important in some way. But all the while that I'm making this stuff, I'm drawing in my sketchbook. My sketchbook was always well, that's the stuff that doesn't matter. That's the fun things. Whereas the real illustration, I was doing in class. I was generating a portfolio. I was going to be in picture books. And so this was almost a sort of throwaway practice. Right after that, I want to tell you that having a career as an illustrator seems like maybe just everything worked out for me, but my 20s were terrible, okay? That my first job after school, I was designing poultry brochures for Fleischmann Hillard. I learned how to use the bar graph tool in Illustrator, and I had assumed at age 23 that basically my chance to be an illustrator had come and gone. I quit that job as soon as possible. I actually got a security escort out on the way, if that tells you what a great employee I was. And I went to a design agency where I was still, this was better. There were pictures involved with this, but it was still not what I wanted to do. So we moved to New York, and I went to graduate school, and it was there that I began to realize that my particular visual culture is just a word for the stuff that we absorb through our eyeballs, had a lot of pen and ink drawings in it, had a lot of typography. And I had some great faculty members that really pointed me towards the stuff I loved reading the most. And maybe that was kind of a clue as to what my visual voice would be. I was fortunate enough to be assigned to write a research paper on Bradbury Thompson, who was a famous designer from the 60s. And he really created this language that we now call type as image. And you can see in these examples, the type is sort of living as an illustration. Okay, I love this. I wanted to do something like this, but in my own way, in my own drawn form. And something about Bradbury Thompson that I still love today is the graphic quality of his work, meaning the flatness. The flatness on top of that rendered depth space with the type. I loved it. Later, I began looking at Jack Unruh, and this is when I suddenly remembered back to my childhood the books I loved as a child. David Macaulay and Shel Silverstein, and of course Calvin and Hobbes, and even the great comics of Winsor McCay. All of these sort of creating a space that is neither word nor image. It is kind of together. It is a word-image space. And as I was in grad school, I moved to New York in August of 2001, so just about 4 weeks before 9/11. And it was a very strange time to be in New York. And my little graduate class, we were basically all we had together. And I began to draw a lot of disasters. I left the painting behind, and I moved into my sketchbook. And to me, this is what you can only do in an MFA program, which is dedicate a bunch of time to just exploring your own voice and what makes you interested in the world. And you can actually see, this is part of my thesis, and I only show you this to show you how much I was fighting to keep the drawings behind the painting. So you can almost literally see the drawings crawling out from behind these images to finally getting to the foreground. And I made this, and I told my graduate director I was going to paint over it with some gouache. And he was a wonderful mentor named Marshall Arisman, and he was a chain smoker. He took this cigarette out. He's like, "John, you got to put the paintbrush down." And I was like, no, I'm going to paint over this. He's like, "That piece is done." And I took it to a crit, and everyone's like, "I kind of think that's what you should be doing." And I was like, "Oh, but no, it needs like blue sky." And so basically they were having an intervention that I was just overworking all of my drawings. And then the last day of graduate school, I finished this piece and ran it down to the gallery. I hung it in the gallery right before the thesis exhibition. And basically all of my graduate school work came to be this image, which was about John Brown, which is a character from this part of the country that I loved, that I lived in Kansas for a while, and he's like Paul Bunyan there, you know? And I wanted to tell his story. And there was something about this drawing. I did it quickly. I loved doing it. It blended that type, image, illustration space. And basically, I came away from graduate school with one image. But it was enough. It was enough. It was enough to get me just enough of a foothold into the editorial community where I would show this to people, and they're like, "Oh, I know what to do with this. I'll hire you to do that. That's what you want to do?" And what's hilarious is I was basically doing this the whole time, right? I had come full circle on the practice that I enjoyed the most. And now I was doing it as the thing I was pushing out to the world, right? That seems like a simple realization. That was worth $80,000, okay? So best money I ever spent in New York City. So I think part of what I want to talk about a little bit more today is just simply, is illustration as a concept basically a space that makes connection? And so the theme of today is illustration as a kind of fellowship. And in fact, if you look across a lot of my books, fellowship is kind of a theme in a lot of ways. Even Drawing Is Magic is basically about having fellowship with your sketchbook. So I've got 2 more hours, and so no, I'm going to move quickly here, but I do want to cover a few things about fellowship inside of illustration. All right, so let's go to art school for just a couple minutes here. All right, words and images. This is what I love about the practice of illustration. When you take these 2 things, these separate things, and you put them together, you pour them into this container, you actually don't get just these separate values. You get a third thing that is a gestalt. And a gestalt is an art school word for the whole is more than the sum of its parts. So somehow a book can be made of 100% words and 100% images. And I like to think of this as kind of an enchanted intersection. It's why books work. It's why I love making books. So some of my work has to do with, classic picture books and chapter books. These are covers written by Thomas Lennon. If you know Thomas Lennon, he's in Reno 911. He's Captain Dangle. Man, these are hilarious books. I'm telling you, if your kids like poop jokes, you're in for a great treat here. It's basically like an Irish Harry Potter. So sometimes my work is like magazine covers, of course, picture books. This one was my first graphic novel about Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was a German theologian who saw what was happening in Germany, and it horrified him so much as a man of God, he chose to put down his love of the 10 Commandments, and thou shalt not kill, and join a plot to assassinate Hitler. It's a really stark tale that requires you to hold a lot of moral disbeliefs together at the same time. And it's why I love writing for kids. It's really challenging to write moral complexity for a 12-year-old mind. But honestly, I get a lot of adults that come up to me and are like, you know what, I never actually understood how Hitler came to power, and Faithful Spy actually really helped me. So that's very gratifying. I write other books, sometimes about what the Holy Ghost does with his time off. Did you know he gets some time off? Well, he likes to hang out with a squirrel and a badger, and they talk about theology. This actually is basically Calvin and Hobbes fan art, if you want to know, perfectly honestly. Like when they're in the wagon together and they're talking about the big ideas of the world. Gosh, I just love that comic. So sometimes the Holy Ghost even talks about art. Whoa, I love all your artwork. Oh, well, I hate them, says the squirrel. Derivative, uninspired, fraudulent, well-crafted, but unremarkable. I may have okay ideas, but they're never great. Oh, says the ghost, why do you keep making so many? Well, I guess not making them is slightly worse than hating them. Incarnation is always painful. So squirrel and ghost spend a lot of time thinking about the world, and if you haven't guessed, the squirrel is basically my own sort of self-portrait, and actually so is the badger. The badger's like a self-righteous jerk who thinks he knows everything, and the squirrel is like this doubting believer who longs to have faith but is always struggling. So I want to talk a little bit about these different vocations of what a drawing can do, because I just very quickly ran through a lot of different things that what it means for illustration to be illustration. Even though when I say that word, you probably think of Norman Rockwell, right? Well, this is why I love the practice. Sometimes illustration can explain in a single spread how Germany went from the height of cultural power to in the arms of a dictator within 10 years. Sometimes I use visual metaphors, right? I take and lift stories like David and Goliath and use that as a sort of template to put onto the reader so that I can help them understand the story I'm telling. Sometimes it's retelling stories you've heard a gazillion times. Like in this book, I took the story of Jesus and I retold it as if it were like a folk tale and you had kind of never heard it before. And he's not even named until the very last page of the book. In this book, I was inspired by the red-lettered Bibles I had in my church as a kid, and like I just loved that Jesus got his own color. Like, that's amazing. And so I was like, what if I made a kid's book where every time he spoke, the type actually totally integrated into the world and like did stuff, right? Now, the only problem with this book, it is untranslatable. So I learned very quickly that this is an English-only book, unfortunately. And well, I guess, I mean, I could redraw it. I'm not going to do that. Or in this book, Shooting at the Stars, this is a retelling of one of the coolest stories of the last 150 years, which was the Christmas truce of World War I, where the French, German, and English soldiers decided to, on Christmas Eve, sing Christmas carols together because they were sick of the war, and they had no idea why they were fighting. So they got together and sang carols, and then on Christmas played soccer together. I know, it's an insane story, and many people think it only happened in one place. But it was like along this 30-kilometer stretch, there were dozens of truces that happened spontaneously on that day. Sometimes it's editorial work. This is for University of Texas Alumni Magazine about all the fracking earthquakes they're getting in Oklahoma, and that basically like no one cares. Like it's just totally another day. So I riffed on the "This is fine" meme and made it my own. Okay in Oklahoma. National Geographic, medical journals. Almost all my work is made by hand on paper, and then I color it with fluid acrylics. I mean, I can draw digitally. I know how to use Procreate and tablets. I just, again, back to the theme of learning to enjoy your work, I just prefer making stuff on paper. It just feels more fun. And eventually it goes to print. This is for the Wall Street Journal. Oh, not Newsweek, Wall Street Journal. And there's kind of nothing better than seeing your work on a big tabloid sheet of newspaper. I mean, I want the newspaper to live just for illustrators to see their work printed, you know, at 13 by 19 tabloid. Sometimes my work appears in advertising. This was a campaign for ESPN many, many years ago. You can see because of how young LeBron is. But anyway, I put this up here because this was a magazine ad that I did. And my old studio mate in New York, Yuko, said, hey, I gotta show you something. And she texted me a picture of this drawing, which was 60 feet high outside of Madison Square Garden. And I had no idea that this got licensed to do this. So it was pretty great. The only problem is like, I hated this drawing. I was so glad for this to be over. So then to see it like 60 feet high was like someone like writing all of your sins out onto a, I did fly to New York to see it because I'm like, this is never gonna happen again. There's this wonderful word that we use in illustration called reportage, and it's the practice of an illustrator acting as an author or as a reporter. And this was, the New York Times sent me to the Cahokia Mounds just across the Mississippi from St. Louis. And it was like the original Native American Manhattan about 2,000 years ago. And I did this interactive piece for the New York Times about my visit there. Sometimes my work is basically just like fan art. I love fan art now. I was sort of skeptical of it early on, but I did these two for Gallery Nucleus in LA. And this one about Star Wars was kind of my first ever viral hit. It was like everywhere around the internet in 2013. And it got to be such a hit that I actually started to worry that the real Star Wars people were gonna see it and like sue me. And then it happened. One day I got a call and it was literally Star Wars. And I was like, I'm sorry, take everything. Whatever you need from me is fine. Forgive me, I'll take it down. And they were like, no, we want you to come to Disney Con, to D23, their big Disney Con. This was right when the sequels were coming out. And they had partnered with Target, and this was all about drawing Star Wars from memory. And so people would come by the Star Wars booth and tell me their favorite thing about Star Wars, and then I would draw it live. And this is when I had a giant beard. I was method illustrating for the Jesus book. But truly, this was the 12-year-old version of me. This is it. I have peaked, basically. And it was really amazing. And for that to come from a project which was basically, I did it on a lark. I did it because this gallery show asked me to do this thing. I had fun doing it. And that print now is the print I've sold the most in my store, which it kind of never dies, which is really cool. Okay, drawing is not drawing. Again, I'm going back to this idea. Drawing and designing are the same thing. In some schools, believe it or not, illustration sits with painting. And graphic design is like with architecture, right? But almost the same thing happens in both design and drawing. It is exactly the same practice. And in fact, in my sketchbooks, you can often see how this practice of what I like to call designistration, right? That's mine, trademark. You should all consider yourself designistrators. And that's this like weird blending space of word, image, type, where you're like putting the art director out of business as a designer, as a drawer. And I really encourage my students to like think of themselves not just as like, I'm gonna make a drawing that goes in a box somewhere, but I'm gonna take over the entire book jacket. I'm gonna take over the spine. I am going to actually use the entire spread of a magazine to kind of own that space as an artist. There's lots of drawings from my editorial life, and this practice actually now is something that editorial is making drawings for magazines, newspapers, periodicals, things like that. And you can see all over it, just the type is everywhere. And now actually, I got an assignment once where I was told I'm not allowed to put any type in it. It was like image only. And it honestly locked me up. I have used type as a sort of way to get the images going for so long that I really got kind of stuck. All right, I think you should think of yourself as an author. Even if you, as an art student, never write any words, if you have created a book, if you have made your own content, how many wordless picture books are there out there, right? You would absolutely call that person an artist and an author, even if they are not a writer. So I was, as a kid, basically traumatized by the 5-paragraph essay. In English class, I was the kid who was begging the teacher to do an alternative project of some kind. And this is an image of, I had to write a report on To Kill a Mockingbird. And I just begged to do anything besides the 5-paragraph essay. And so I made this giant board game. And it had this enormous rule book in it, which to me is hilarious because I wrote actually 10x what I would have had to write with the actual assignment. But because it was a game, because it was skinned in this thing that I was interested in, I was willing to do so much more than the existing assignment. And I do think there's a lesson in that. Like whatever that thing is that you are making as an art student right now, and you're like, well, I am doing my painting, but what I really want to be doing is like making this board game. You should listen to that. That little procrastina working over there, that thing you're wanting to do more, that's probably closer to the heart of your visual voice than anything else. This is my newest project, the Mythmakers. You can read it all really quickly right now. This, excuse me, this was a 5-year project. It's really, every time I finish one of these graphic novels, I always think, I'm never doing that again. Like basically, it's like I finish it and I'm like, well, thank goodness that's not something I ever want to try. Because the delay of gratification is so long, the writing challenge, the research challenge. I mean, as you look at these, you can see just how integrated every page is. So like I control the InDesign file in these, which is really awesome. But it just means like every time something moves, it's like a domino effect, right? And so the entire book, as it's being developed, is just like so fragile of an object that it's really hard to sketch out and to iterate on. This story tells, of course, about the amazing fellowship between C.S. Lewis and J.R.R. Tolkien, authors of The Hobbit and Narnia and many other well-known tales. In this book, I ran into a problem narratively where if you know anything about British men, they don't really do anything. Like, I'm making a 224-page graphic novel about guys who just sit around, drink pints, and talk. So very quickly, I realized no child is going to want to read this book. And so I created these two characters, Lion and Wizard, just totally chosen at random, to act as sort of avatars for this story. So you follow Lion and Wizard alongside Lewis and Tolkien as you're learning about their life. And the great trick of this book is you get to do some of the things that Lewis and Tolkien are writing about while they are talking about it. So riding a dragon, going on a dungeon crawl. And really, the more I look at this book, the more I realized I just hijacked this subject matter to really draw the things I wanted to, right? When I step back and think, I'm gonna spend 5 years on a project, I better be drawing some dragons. Like, I cannot just draw old white dudes in meetings at Magdalen College for 300 pages, right? I've got to have some enjoyment in there. And you can kind of see it all through this book. Swords, magic armor. They go to the north because Lewis and Tolkien were, as we talked about fan art earlier, they were basically bonded together originally by fan art, being fans of Norse mythology. It's as if you came into a meeting and somebody was wearing a Wolverine t-shirt and you were like, oh my gosh, I love Wolverine too. That's how they met. They loved Norse mythology. And Tolkien had a reading club called the Coal Biters. He was always making these like funny clubs with little names, where they read Norse mythology and Icelandic together. That's an Oxford Don's idea of a good time. And throughout this story, it's really a chance for you to both like go on two parallel journeys where you learn about the biography of Tolkien and Lewis, but you also learn about where myths come from and why myths exist and why fairy tales mattered to Lewis and Tolkien and why human beings have basically been telling the same story over and over and over again. So I love this quote by Walter Wangerin Jr. that says, and actually I think you could debate this, but his contention is that art does not exist until it is shared. Meaning we can make stuff on our own, and maybe that's craft, and maybe that's great. Like you're on a desert island and you make work for yourself, for your own enjoyment. But until it reaches another person, it's not art. And I think I tend to agree with that. Oh, that's pretty. Ah, well, I'm afraid you don't know much about art. I've discarded the trivial. Most people will spend their lives entombed in the mundane. I've decided to only spend my time on the important. Work that matters, things that last. Art is not, quote, pretty. It's eternal. The artist who builds a masterpiece will live forever. A ticket to immortality. What could be more important? I need a sound effect, like a Foley effect up here. So you like it? It's beautiful. So if we're honest with ourselves, as we're all sitting around going through our lives, especially artists, making work, we all have this maybe secret immortality project we're working on. Like, what is the great thing I'm going to make that's going to last forever, right? And I think actually the truth is that we are making sandcastles, right? We are sandcastles. But I would say that we are holy sandcastles. It doesn't mean that the things that we make don't matter. But if any of you have made anything in your life, you do know this very simple truth that good art somehow resists being made, right? Like it does not want to exist. I don't know why this is. It seems like you can drop like an acorn into the ground and it turns into a tree without any human intervention. But somehow art does not want to exist. And this is a chart I have drawn for my students every year that I try to remind people about, that the act of making art is always, always, always frustration. And if we can, as an artist community with teaching young people, try to normalize struggling with your work, I think you're better off. And basically what this means is anytime you have an idea, you climb this little ladder and you try to catch this imaginary butterfly. And as soon as you try to get it, you fall off into the pit of despair, like almost instantly. You know, as soon as you start to make something real, it's terrible. You see all the flaws in it. You think you're stupid forever, like trying it. And the mistake that young artists make is to think that the problem was the idea was bad, right? So you get to the pit of despair and you're like, okay, that was a bad idea because it didn't work. So they go back and they try a new idea. Well, guess what? They end up in the pit again. The only way out of the pit is to actually commit to that idea and take the long, slow road out, slowly, every day, working on it, getting a little bit better at your craft and committing to that idea. And you would think that after the number of books that I have made, that somehow I would have found a skip over the pit of despair. And I have not found it. Maybe it's possible. But it seems like struggle is required for all good work. And that is something I wish somebody had told me when I was younger, that actually learning feels a lot like failure, and you have to do that a lot to get good at your craft. Oh, and importantly, see that final thing you made? Do you see how the distance between what you imagined in your head is not as good as what you made? This is why artists hate their work, because they see the butterfly. No one else can see that. They just look at the thing you made and they're like, oh, that's pretty good. And then the artist is like, no, you have no idea how bad this is, right? Anyway, we're head cases. So, all right, I'm coming to the end, I promise. How should you think about art school? I'm here to tell you, I've taught now for 20 years. I'm an accidental professor. I did not think that I was going to do this with my life. I got into a classroom when I lived in New York. I taught at Parsons one semester. I was teaching InDesign. I didn't know InDesign. I was a chapter ahead of the students. And even as chaotic as that time was, I really need to write everyone an apology in that class. I loved it. I loved being in the classroom. And I have come to really make sure that young people at this stage in your life, when you're thinking about what it is you're doing in your career, to distinguish training and education. You need both, okay? But they're different. Training can happen one-on-one and alone, but education only happens in community. That's why you go to school. That's actually the lesson of the Inklings, believe it or not. There is a weird cultural liturgy that artists basically are loners, that their best work, if you're a genius, is probably going to come from you being alone and sort of miserable, and that if you hang out with other people, they might actually steal your ideas. And so artists tend to be nervous about community, but art always gets better in community, and it's something I've seen in my teaching for years and years. So this is, to me, the things that you should care about at this stage in your life, and this is the education part of it. This is the liberal arts to me. This is why I teach at a school like WashU, like here, where the things that you're going to do in education involve this creation of knowledge, this personal discovery, and then this cultivation of virtue. And those sound like really high ideas, but actually those are the things that you get from a great university, from a great community where you have peers, you have faculty, you have mentors, and you have other people laboring alongside you to figure these things out together. It's why college and graduate school is such a precious time. So Dana Gioia said this: "We do not provide arts education to create more artists, though that is a byproduct. The real purpose of arts education is to create complete human beings." Now, if you're tempted to think this is sort of egotistical of artists, what Dana is talking about is not just the artists themselves, but everyone who experiences that art is also becoming a complete human being, is kind of flourishing because of that shared art experience. And so I want to encourage young artists that the thing you're doing by really sacrificing a different kind of life and making your life a life where you make things for others, that's a really noble calling, and it's a good one. And there are a lot of jobs out there, believe it or not. So when your parents freak out, it's okay. Tell them, you know what, it's going to be fine. I may work at Starbucks for a year, but I'm doing something really great in the world. So finally, I just want to talk just very briefly about my MFA program at WashU in St. Louis. If any of you are really thinking about someday continuing your studies, we study this amazing thing I was talking about called visual culture, where we make comics, we make picture books, we study visual culture. There's all of our crits involve laughing. I mean, every crit is happy by this picture. But one of the great things I try to tell people about is that visual culture is really how our world makes meaning. And that is not just involved in like stuff that goes in an art museum, but like Chinese food menus and tractor tires and baseball cards and comic books. All the things and the stuff of our world is how our culture is actively mediating meaning in the world. And by studying that and giving it a real seat at the table, you can actually make your own work a lot better. So at IVC, we try to marry these three things, this like love of being an artist and illustrator, love of being a writer, and then also like treating illustrators like they're actual scholars. And this is one of the biggest problems with illustration education right now, is most of the time illustrators are treated as these wrists that come in and want to learn what pen to use and how I use Photoshop. But actually, if we think of illustrators and graphic designers as scholars, as thinkers, as makers that are contributing to a larger dialogue about what visual culture means, it's really important. We have this wonderful archive. If you're ever in St. Louis, come visit us. The Dowd Illustration Research Archive, named after Professor Douglas Dowd. It's like the best version of your grandma's attic. It's like all this stuff that you can search through, comics, ephemera, pinups, but we have this incredible board game collection. We have a magic earring Barbie, which is very rare. We have hundreds of things actually that have never even been cataloged. We have all this stuff. It's been a passion project of WashU, where we hear from illustrators that are coming to the end of their life and they want to donate their archive to us so that future generations of illustrators can actually sit with their work and study it. So if you're ever in St. Louis, come visit and I'll take you to the Dero. Okay, finally, oh wait, hold on, here we go. So I love this Howard Thurman quote. He was a preacher from the Civil Rights era. Don't ask what the world needs. Ask what makes you come alive and go do it. Because what the world needs is people who have come alive. Okay, thank you. Wow, are we doing questions?
Yeah, if you have time.
All right. Who's brave?
Thank you, April.
When you were studying as a fine artist and author of your famous books, did you find joy and amusement in your own hobby, or anything you'd like to define art and drawing itself amusing to you?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. One of the weird things about doing something you love as a job is like it has a way of sometimes stealing the joy out of it. When suddenly like the thing you did for fun all the time, now like there's deadlines and frankly, sometimes you're drawing stuff you're just really not that interested in. And that's part of every job. There's always work. But to me, the cultivating the hobby part of drawing alongside the professional part is really important. So for me, that's like doing my sketchbook. Like that's the part of it that reminds me of why I'm doing this to begin with. So then when I've got a deadline for PC Magazine and I'm drawing something that I'm never going to show anyone in the world, well, I can kind of get through that and make it to my next sketchbook appointment. Yeah, good question.
Thank you, John.
All right, there was one back there, I think.
So I'm always curious about the way that various artists depict certain figures, specifically religious ones, because unlike real life people or fictional characters, there isn't like a confirmed way of drawing these figures, especially so each one ends up being personalized to each person. So I am wondering, basically, what made you decide to depict certain figures the way that you do? Like Jesus, for an example. Were you inspired? Is it just like instinct, a habit, etc.? Because it's very interesting seeing the way different people depict these figures.
Oh, yeah. No, such a good question. I basically have an entire other lecture about this because you think it sounds easy. Like, okay, I'm going to draw Jesus. We all know what Jesus looks like. But if you're in America, we all have like 4 basic images of Jesus we've probably seen 100 times. Like there's the bearded lady one, there's the one that looks like Michael W. Smith. There's like certain ones where you're like, why is it always the same, right? And so it's an amazing question. You go back to ancient art, Christ always was depicted with these like very owlish features, like sunken eyes, long nose. They think that goes back to the Shroud of Turin, which is this, sort of purportedly burial shroud of Christ. Okay, you can tell I did way too much research on my way to drawing Christ, but it's a huge problem. And in fact, at one point, I was gonna depict him wearing black as a sort of ode to Johnny Cash. Well, a little research revealed that okay, black dye was some of the most expensive dye in that era in Israel. So, okay, that's out, right? So you eventually do enough versions where I wanted Christ in that case to look as much like from that area as possible. And I wanted him to look homeless, right? There's ways where you can make editorial decisions that your reader is just absorbing, right? And with Lewis and Tolkien, their drawings of them in the book, they really don't look like their actual portrait. I'm using them so that they're tagged to look like Lion and Wizard, and so I'm taking some liberties there. But yeah, really good question.
Thank you. Do you guys have any other questions for John?
When you first answered the first question up there, the last comment that you made was your appointment to your sketchbook. It sounds like a self-care routine. I don't know if it's a joke or not.
Yeah, I need to be like an influencer where I wake up at 3:30 in the morning and I'm like, it's just me with my sketchbook for 4 hours before I eat avocado toast. No, I made it sound a little bit more regimented than it is. I'm not that disciplined. I wish I was. But basically, I'm waiting for my next faculty meeting or going to church. Those are the times I sit down, I'm quiet, I know I can draw. And actually, it does help me listen, believe it or not, despite the appearances.
Interesting. Yeah. I'm just curious because one of the main points in your earlier diagram was that pit of despair. Mm-hmm. I'm curious if that can be moved through quickly or avoided if there was a more regimented self-care routine within that.
I do think you get better at your craft, right? I don't think it's like you're always just the terrible artist you were when you were 18, when you're 48. You learn how to make the things you want to make. So you do get better at your process. But there's even a pit of despair in sketchbook drawings. It's why I always draw in pen, so I can't erase it. You have to keep going. Sometimes they just don't work out. And sometimes they look great, right? And that's kind of part of the risk-taking of drawing. So it's why in Drawing Is Magic, I always say, you gotta draw in pen. It'll teach you to respond and not think about the errors.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't think we can leave until we get a kid to ask a question. Right here, I see it. These are always the best.
Why do you always mess up first? First. When
Yeah.
you draw a picture, why do you mess up?
What a great question. I know. I've been asking this my whole life. I bet actually when you draw, you don't mess up. And see, this is the problem. Once you reach 12 years old, you become self-aware that there's other people in the world, and you start thinking about how your work appears to other people. But when you're your age, you're just drawing to have fun. So, yeah. It's great because Drawing Is Magic basically works for kids in kindergarten and kids in an MFA program. So I don't know, what does that tell you about art school?
Thank you for your question.
Good question.
Any other? Okay, can we take one more?
Yeah, sure.
So this, hopefully I word this question right, but do you fear that how you build up your legacy, of course, but do you fear that that legacy can easily crumble down in just like an instant? Like if you do something wrong or you make something not quite right, that legacy will fall apart, or just over time you become more and more irrelevant. And it's just like, it's like that sandcastle allegory that you gave out. Like everything you think is gonna be super great, it's just gonna be irrelevant. Something's gonna replace it or something like that. Like, how do you handle that, I guess?
I mean, now I'm worried about those things. I wasn't thinking about that until just this moment.
I didn't mean to.
No, I really get that. I think that's a very normal thing to think, especially in this era of living in social media, where it seems like people are great and then suddenly they're not. they're canceled, they did something wrong. And so I've met a lot of young artists who fear posting work or sharing their own stuff because they are afraid that maybe someone's not gonna like it. And so I always just tell people, you don't have to share everything. You don't have to be worried about people coming after you as long as you are committed and interested in the things you wanna make. So I do think the bigger temptation of just like, man, I wanna make a lasting mark in this world, and what happens if I don't? And that's a fear that goes back as far as humanity, right? And we're making sandcastles, but also, you know, I happen to believe this is really not our home, and there's actually a larger purpose to our life that has nothing to do with the things that we make. And so in some ways, I think centering enjoyment, centering being present in your work, and not having ambitions that go beyond the scope of just that drawing on that page is actually really healthy. And then let the work do what it's gonna do out there. Yeah, really good question.
Thank you.
Okay,
Thanks.
you know what, okay, sorry, there was one right here. One more, I promise this is it. Everyone hates Q&As that go on forever. I'm sorry, you couldn't escape me. This better be good.
First off, just thanks for coming, John. This is great.
Thank you.
I'm going to be teaching a week-long illustration workshop at a local Christian college this summer. And I wondered if you had any words of advice for young artists that are wanting to incorporate their faith with their artwork.
Yeah, I mean, I never wanted to make faithful or sacred work when I was in art school, frankly, because most Christian art was terrible. I mean, it was awful. Not only was it not well crafted, but the worst sin was that it was uninteresting. You know, it was not strange or weird. And so I tend to tell young artists, you have to actually be interested in the ideas behind the thing. You can't come into your artwork with this kind of mission. You have to actually be interested in the goals of the work itself and the story you're telling. If you do that faithfully, and I actually think Tolkien and Lewis are a good example of that, they actually were really interested in the fantasy, in the world building. And that's why I think those stories still endure today. So I think if you're faithful to the calling of the work, you know, the rest will kind of take care of itself. But if you're coming into a piece like, wow, I'm gonna do great things for God with this painting, that's never gonna go well, right? Like that's not a posture you should take into any piece of art. I think humility, remembering it's a sandcastle, I think that will help you make your best work much more than like, this is gonna do great things for the world. But yeah, really good question. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.